Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Back in the studio with the man himself, Mr. Eric J. Moore. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Let's get back at it. Let's do it.
You know, for whatever reason, I was like kind of excited, like pumped up to do this podcast today. I feel like we're finally getting to a point. January's behind us. So now, you know, we've done kickoff meetings. We've set visions. We've set goals. We've set standards of the organization. Now it's like, all right, implementation time. We can get back in the rhythm of doing these podcasts for you guys every Tuesday so we can provide some value to the marketplace. But I know there's one thing that you wanted to talk about today. You didn't tell me. I'm just like you listeners that are listening in right now. I have no idea where this conversation is going to go this morning. So
Matthew
go
said,
ahead.
he said, do we know, what are we talking about today? I said, I got it. I got it. See, so it's a surprise to everybody, including Matthew. You know, what I want to jump into is pretty much anyone who's listening to this podcast who wants to grow and scale, this conversation's for you. And I'm going to talk about a challenge about growth and scaling. And it's come up with, it's a recent conversation, but it's come up with clients. Every single person has went through this who's had to build an organization. Every person who is growing an organization will go through this. And if you're not prepared, there's no way you're ever going to hit your goal. There's no way you're ever going to get there. So the situation I'm talking about is looking at the team around you. And so a doctor calls me up and we're having this conversation. And it was a key position inside the organization that he had promoted this person to years ago. And at the time, you know, this person really could come in and make a big difference. And they did. They came in, they put things in place, they put all kinds of processes in place. But what happened over time is that the organization passed this gentleman, passed this person up, passed their skill sets, their ability, and now you have a problem. So tower leadership comes in, we go look at the business inside and we say, hey, listen, we've got a lot of work to do here. There's a lot of things that aren't getting done. There's a lot of things that need to happen. Now you've got this dilemma, right? And the dilemma comes down to, I've got a guy or gal that I really love a lot. I mean, we're like family. We care about each other. We go way back, but they're underperforming. I want you to think about that for a moment. If you're listening to this podcast, think about the time you had a person who you really cared about, but it was underperforming. And when you're in that situation, it's like this critical decision every entrepreneur will face is, do I do what's in the best interest of the organization, or do I ultimately cower? And I'll use the word cower because if you don't handle it, well, cower really comes from the idea of being cowardly, which means that you're not willing to do what it takes to actually grow and scale this organization. And you'll justify it in so many ways. You'll try to justify it by using, you know, words like family or words like loyalty and words, those types of words, and you'll justify it. But what ends up happening is that over time, the organization doesn't grow and it doesn't scale. And who gets hurt? Well, the patients get hurt because you're not able to grow anymore. You're not able to serve. You're not able to actually do the things you need to do. The team gets hurt because the organization doesn't have the ability to give raises, doesn't have the ability to invest in them, right? You get hurt because you don't have the ability to obviously watch your organization net worth, valuation increase. And most importantly, and this is the most important fact, the person that you're not willing to actually confront gets hurt the most. The person that you think you're trying to help and you think that's leadership, and it's not leadership. Leadership is the exact opposite of that. Leadership is actually being willing to make the difficult decision. I think, Matthew, you threw up a statistic one time that like 96% of businesses never get to $1 million, right? And it was like 1% ever get to 10 million. So why the hell do 99% of businesses never get to $10 million? This is why. Because what ends up happening is it's not just about patient acquisition. It's not just about, right, just investing in marketing and those types of things and opportunities. It's about being able to make critical decisions as a leader. And I reminded this doctor, I said, look, I want you to think about this for a moment. Is there something called proverbial valley of death, where all companies hit a place where they have to invest in higher levels of management. And what happens is especially in the dental world, is people do not invest in that higher level of management. And because they're not willing to invest in that higher level of management, they get stuck. And not only do they get stuck, but they decline. And they try to promote people to their incompetence. They try to promote the office manager to be a director of operations, for instance. And they promote people to an incompetence that ultimately hurts the entire organization. Their excuse is that they're being loyal to somebody, or they're trying to be a good leader, but it's the exact opposite. One thing I tell people all the time is leadership is freaking hard. It's hard, and it doesn't always look pretty. It's not always a pump you up. But being willing and convicted to make the difficult decisions is what makes you a leader. When you cower away from those decisions, when you don't want to face the hurt, when you don't want to actually do the best thing for the organization because you justify it by some weak response, that is actually the lack of leadership. And so every one of you that listens to this either has faced this or will face this. I was in a room of entrepreneurs back in October, and the lady who was kind of prompting the group, she says, hey, raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur who ever had to let go of somebody you really liked a lot but wasn't successful in the position. And like everyone raised their hand. And now interesting, like everyone in the room was over $10 million, but isn't that interesting? Because there becomes a critical point in every organization where team members grow to meet the positional need, or the team has to ultimately, the leadership has to make a decision, because the top of it, and Matthew, you and I talk about top of the organization all the time. The top of the organization has to be strong. The owners have to be strong. The executive team has to be strong. Everyone has to be strong, but it's up to everyone to continue to grow, especially the owner. And so what ends up happening is, in this situation, is we now have a critical decision. We call it this is a leadership challenge, a junction point in the growth of the organization. Do I have courage and make the decision that's the best thing for the organization, or do I cower down, tell myself a bunch of excuses why I didn't make the decision, and hurt everybody? And so many of you, by the way, we've all made the mistake. So if you think I'm being preachy, I'm just going to tell you, right, I've made the mistake myself. So I'm not above anybody. We've all made this damn mistake if you've been in business long enough. But it becomes more and more difficult as time goes on, and it becomes more challenging. And that's going to be a great separator. If you're going to really truly grow and scale an organization, you got to have the courage to make critical decisions and have uncomfortable conversations. And if you're not willing to do that, then either sit and stay in the same place you are, or get out of the damn way, because you're not going to be able to grow an organization the way it needs to if you do not have the courage to have difficult conversations. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone can't grow. It doesn't mean that someone shouldn't be moved to another position. I'm not saying that person couldn't find another place in the organization, or maybe they are successful. It doesn't matter. Maybe now you can't reduce someone's pay and you can't demote people. Okay, that doesn't work. But there might be a movement you can make within inside the organization that supports this person. But you got to hear me in this, that every single one of you have or will face a critical decision, and you've got to have the courage to make it. So I had this conversation with this doctor, and I'm like, look, you hear me talk about things like organizational ceiling. You hear me talk about concepts that are difficult. And yet when you hear it from a conceptual standpoint, that shit's easy, right? You just write it down and go, hey, Eric said this, that sounded good. Hey, this sounded good. But when you actually have to do it, when you have to put it in place, when you actually have to be the one to make the decision, you realize that this is hard work, man. You signed up for this crap. I mean, this is hard. This is why entrepreneurs get rewarded so damn well. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And as cliche as that sounds, it's just true. Leadership is hard. Everyone who I have met who is in dental, who owns a dental practice, says, I'm a leader. And I would challenge that notion. You might be in the lead of people, but are you a leader? And leadership is not just pumping up people and giving high fives. Leadership is making difficult damn decisions and being willing to push through to help the benefit of the organization, the patients, your family, everybody. And most doctors are not willing to do that. And on that, I'll breathe.
I think, from my experience, I feel like the dental world is very reactive when it comes to growing and scaling. So they react to what's already happening in their business instead of future forecasting it out. One of the things that we did the last couple of weeks is, I was showing you basically a 12-month organizational chart, or a 24-month, like a rolling 24-month organizational chart for Tower Leadership. So we can look at, all right, who are the pieces that we need? Do we need to hire internally? Meaning, do we promote someone within? And then what are the roles and responsibilities of this new role? Or do we look outside of Tower Leadership for this position? And I think in dental, sometimes people hit momentum and they go from 800,000 to 1.5 to 2 million. And then they don't realize, number one, how they got there. And then number two is, okay, what team members am I going to need? I was able to get to this point with the team that I have. Can't I just promote somebody from within? We're talking about like two different styles of business at this point. So they're always reactive. I mean, most of the time I would argue when someone, say it's a office manager, you go from 1 million to 2 million, you probably become an operations director. And then you go from 2 to 5 million. Then you become the COO. I guarantee you the dentist or the doctor or the owner is never having a conversation with that person to say, these are your new roles and responsibilities as this position in the organization. And I think sometimes that person just thinks that they can do the exact same things when once they get promoted, they need to hand off some of those things. Like you don't just, I see this in dental all the time. It's someone will get promoted to that level and then the doctor doesn't hire anyone to take over the duties that they are getting promoted away from. So how do you expect this person to even perform in this new role when you didn't take anything off of their plate? So to me, the dental world is very reactive in the sense of growth and what team members they need. And I do think, at some point, the businesses or the dental practices in the marketplace that get stuck, it's because they don't want to make the next investment. There's going to be a challenge. So if you're listening to this and you are a startup or if you're a $3 million business, guess what? There's going to be a tough investment that you're going to have to make, especially in team. That's going to be uncomfortable for the first couple months when you make that investment. But the idea is that they're going to have an ROI. So when you hire these people, you should always look at, all right, so how is this going to affect the top line of the organization and the bottom line? Is this going to increase profit or is this going to increase the top line of the organization? So what needs to be done? And if you can start forecasting this out, you're going to be in a much better place. If you say, all right, in the next 12 months, if we go from X to Y, we're going to need these 3 team members. Do we have people in our organization? List out the roles and responsibilities of who those people are. Do we have someone that can take that over? And if we do, what training is going to need to be had? Can I do the training? Do I need to outsource the training? What needs to happen? I think a lot of the doctors, they think they can train this person up. And when are they going to have the time to do that? They never have the time to do that.
Time or the ability. The truth is that it's ability too. I always love people who are going to train somebody up without any experience in that position, even if you have the time. Look, for instance, I mean, I'm not an operations person. I know operations, I understand operations, and I know ultimately what operations should look like. But I'm not the builder of process. That's not me. It's not my skill set. It's not my superpower. I hire people with that superpower, and so should you. And so this idea of like, I'm going to train them up on doing something that I don't even do or know how to do, no, you will fail. You need to have somebody who comes in and says, Doc, this is how we should do this. And you go, wow, who shows you things. And you're like, holy moly, that propels the organizational growth. You quit trying to freaking hire the cheapest person possible and tell yourself you're going to train them up. This is why you guys are getting beat up and surpassed by private equity. Private equity does the exact opposite. They hire great leadership. They hire high-end leadership. They hire the best people. While independent dentistry hires the cheapest person. They promote to incompetence. They aren't willing to do the things that need to be done. And this is why you keep getting lapped up. And for gosh sake, do not call your friends who are making the same dumbass decision, excuse my French, and ask them what you should do. They don't know what to do. Quit asking them. They do not know what to do. Ask someone who actually knows how to do this. Ask someone who's done it. You want to ask somebody? Go ask the guy who's built a $30 million dental practice. Ask him or her. That's the person you should ask. If this person's doing less revenues than you, please do not ask them. If they're doing the same revenues as you, please don't ask them. Go ask the person that you aspire to become. Have a conversation with them. Call a company like Tower who works with large clients. Call somebody who ultimately can give you advice around that. But if you're asking somebody, it's like being 400 pounds overweight and asking the person next to you at Wendy's, hey, what do you think? Should I eat these fries? Like, that's not who you ask for that advice, right? I mean, that person's gonna be like, nah, man, they're great. I mean, there's extra season today. Like, that's not who you ask. You ask the person who's in shape, who's fit, who's done it. And like, that's the person you ask. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make in this, because dental's small. It really is. It is a community. And that's the great part about dental. But the crappy part about that is that you all share the same paradigm. And I just put out something on my Instagram as a video I shot, and I was just talking about the 1%. And I said, you got to understand this idea, cliche of the 1%. We say 1%, but we forget what that actually looks like. Doctors are all smart. Doctors are all intelligent. Doctors are all, right, the overachievers. You got to beat 99 of them. You want to be the top 1%? That means you got to beat 99 of them, which means if you lined up 100 doctors, and I want you to literally think about that, you got to do it better than 99 of them. That means you got to be you got to be you got to do things differently than they do. You don't ask the same questions as they ask. You don't walk the same as them. You don't eat the same as them. You don't do the same things as them. Those guys are all the 99% that you don't want to become. 1% is a whole nother place to be. And if you're going to be 1%, quit fricking doing it like the 99%. Stop it. Stop listening to them. Don't walk like they walk. Don't do what they do. You got to do it different. So hiring your office manager to be a director of operations when they have no experience being a director of operations and then hope you can coach them up, that's a 99% of them mistake, okay? The 1% goes hires the right person. The 99% thinks they're saving money. They went and asked their tax CPA and their accountant, hey, do you think that it makes sense for me to invest in a team member? And their accountant said, no, you could save money if you just promoted your office manager. And so you end up in the same, like, I'm passionate this morning about this because you got to hear me on this. You got to, wake up and hear me. I want you to wake up and hear me. And because you're making the same damn mistake, and I think you think you're not making it, and you are. And so I'm trying to wake you up today and say, listen to me on this podcast. Quit doing it like them. Go do it different. Hire the best. Make the difficult decision. Be critical in your decision making. Go hire people that are smarter than you if you really want to build it. If you want to hang out at the country club on every Friday and sit around and have a beer at lunch, stop listening to the podcast because this isn't for you anyhow.
I mean, I would expand upon that too. It's, sometimes they'll come back to us and they'll say, I talked to Joe Schmo in town that's, $5 million and he's got 2 locations, and they think that's the guy. Well, if you look at it, that guy is probably 20 to 30 years in business and has only accomplished $5 million. That's not your guy either. Like, just because you think that person, we've seen it a million times. You pull back that person, he doesn't have any operational. He can barely take vacations. He's got 2 associates that he's overpaying. He's got some hygienist that he's paying $200,000 to, and he has no idea where he's going as an organization. He's capped out. So when someone looks at the valuation of that practice, they're like, I'm buying crap. I don't want this. So I think, you got to look outside. And I know in the dental world, you feel like, well, if I go to someone that, has a very successful, a $10 million organization, all they're going to want to do is figure out how they can buy me or swallow me up in the future. So I don't want to talk to that person. That's okay. I think you gave your private group an assignment, this was probably 2-3 years ago, to go talk to someone outside of dental that has grown a successful business. Go talk to them and ask them how to do it. I think what I've noticed in the marketplace, dentists associate themselves as dentists and not business owners. So when they look at complex situations, they put it in the frame of reference of a dental practice and instead of thinking of it like a business. You have to start thinking of it differently because you're thinking like the 99 people.
That's right.
You're not thinking like the 1% if you're thinking just in dental terms. The 1% they don't even associate themselves as a dental practice. They associate themselves as blank LLC or sole whatever it is.
That's right.
They associate themselves as that. And that's how they're able to catapult. They're looking at it differently. They're saying they're looking at business studies, not just dental studies, on how they were able to get from point A to point B. And if you look at anything in business, it always flows in the same pathway. You have to make the investments here. You have to raise funding here. You have to put these people in to help with management. And for whatever reason, dental practices, and it might just be because most owners of dental practices worked underneath a guy that had been doing the same thing for 30 years.
We've set this precedent, Matthew. I mean, this precedent, look, I'm going to say it here on this podcast now so you can hear me. $5 million in revenue after 30 years is not success. Just so you know. 30 years, $5 million in revenue is not success. Your peers just told you it was. If I invested in a company today, and it's 2054. Okay, so we're having this conversation in February of 2054, and I invest in that company, and they're $5 million in 2054. You would come back to me and you'd say, Eric, you're a buffoon for investing in that company. I mean, what a fool. I mean, they've only grown to $5 million in 30 years, and you would think I didn't know what I was doing. You would say, God, Eric, you're not a great investor. I mean that's, and I'm being serious and the reason why is you guys are still shaking off this idea that you had this little sole proprietorship little business where you hung a little thing, shingle. And by the way, it's not your fault in some way. So let me give you a little grace. Now that I beat the hell out of you, let me give you some grace. I'll give you the grace in this. Look, the profession is coming out of an area where, ultimately speaking, it was a sole practitioner with one office who kept it for 30 years and then sold to the associate. Like, I get all that. Like, I understand that's why. But I'm trying to release a new paradigm. I need you to understand that business of $5 million after 30 years is not successful. You should be at $5 million after 5 years at the longest. And so, if I say that number to you and you just think that's freaking crazy, then just turn off the podcast because you're probably not the ideal person. I'd rather have the people listen who say, you're right, Eric. How can I get to 20 million or 30 million now? And you might say to me, well, Eric, why would I want to do that? Because if you can, why wouldn't you? Because if you have the ability to create a $50 million organization, but instead you just want to take half the week off, then shame on you. You're probably a pretty selfish person, because if you had the ability to grow your team, help their families, help the community, and impact legacies, create foundations, and you don't do it just because you want to chill out, shame on you. Shame on you. Yeah. This isn't the podcast for you, because I'd rather you go listen to the chill out and hang out and do nothing podcast. There's plenty of podcasts that are all about just chilling, man, sitting on a beach. This ain't that podcast. Go find that podcast. There's plenty of people that will tell you it's okay to be mediocre in life and you should just chill. This isn't that. This is called the Dental Wealth Podcast. It's called creating significant, dramatic wealth and impacting a whole shitload of people. And that's what this podcast was created for. It was always created for that. So if that's what you want, you got to make critical decisions. You got to be willing to make critical decisions. You got to cut the bullshit and you got to go to work. And when you get to that place, by the way, if you want to relax, this is how you relax. Go create a $50 million organization and watch what happens with the executive team you can put in place. Watch how much more time you actually get with your family, how much more time you actually get to be on the beach, how much more time that you actually get to spend with your kids. If you actually create the organization, you get more time to spend with people, but you got to be willing to push through. And if what's holding you back is just simple decision to freaking move on from somebody who's underperforming and helping them be successful somewhere else, and you're not willing to do that, then you're not cut out for entrepreneurship. You're just not. And it's okay to wave the red flag or white flag, I guess, and say, red flag sounds disastrous. The white flag, and say, hey, I'm just going to sell off to a DSO because I heard $3 million is a lot of money. And you can go be that person. And then, it's like I just talked to someone the other day, and I know I'm going to do a quick shift here. I said to this guy who was like, I'm just going to sell my dental practice off. And he never made it into anything. Like it's like $1 million dental practice, $1.5 million. He's like, I'm going to sell this thing off. And he's single. And I looked at one of the advisors and I said, the guy will be dead in 5 years. And I'm actually that serious. I'm like, never created any tremendous wealth, never created anything of purpose, never ultimately impacted a whole bunch of people. He'll sell us this thing off. He'll retire in the next 5 years, and then he'll be dead because there was no point in living. Now you might say, well, Eric, that's kind of harsh. Go look at the statistics. Go look at the statistics. You don't have to listen to me. Go look at the statistics. Statistically speaking, there's nothing to drive him anymore. And statistically speaking, his days are numbered. If your idea is your ideal life, is to grow a practice to $1.5 million and then sit around until you die, man, that's a shame. That's just a shame in life. So I would say that and especially if the reason you ended up with that is because you weren't willing to push the needle and make one difficult decision. I mean, I can't imagine, I don't know what your faith is or anyone's faith listening to this, assuming that you're, religious and believe there's a God. I can't imagine standing in front of God and being like, God sitting there saying, hey, I gave you all these abilities and talents and things that you could do so you could impact people's and impact people and change your life and do all this stuff. But ultimately you didn't take advantage of it because you weren't willing to make one decision.
Yeah.
That sucks. And you didn't actually turn it into any fruit that outlived you. And when we turn back around, I mean, there's no assets to show. I mean, those are gone, and there's no impact to show, not really. And you just kind of ate up, we work 3 days a week, and that's what you did with the gifts I gave you. That to me doesn't make sense. And I know I sound passionate right now, but I am passionate because I need you listening to this podcast. Some of you are listening to this podcast going, man, forget this guy, man. Forget this guy. Well, that's because I'm calling you out on your shit.
Yeah.
And you don't like it. But the truth is that if you're going to be there, if you're going to be a leader, and if you're going to build a great organization, then you got to muster up the courage to make the difficult conversations, the difficult decisions. That's what greatness does. And if you want to truly have a great organization, you got to have courage. You got to be willing to push through.
And I would argue if you're not wanting to grow probably over 5 million, then you would probably be better off just being an associate. We can show you how being an associate, you can make a ton of money. And
sure.
Ultimately surpass probably the owning dentist. And you don't have to worry about the stresses of team members quitting and doing all this, just being an associate. Like, I think sometimes, you think by owning this business, it's going to be all sunshine and roses. It's difficult work. But if you're not trying to surpass and grow and scale, and at some point you're just settling with a $4 million, a $2 million, a $3 million practice, you get back down to what was the point of even starting the business? You could have done all of this, been just as successful, ended up with the same amount in retirement if you just were an associate. But yet you added unnecessary stress over the years. So I think if, you are, most 99% of the listeners own a business. They own a dental practice. You guys need to be the ones to look at yourself and say, what have I been doing for the last 20 years? I need to do something different. If you haven't crossed the 3, 4, 5, 6, $10 million mark and you've been in business for 10 plus years, you need to start looking internally and saying, what do I need to do? Clearly, I haven't been doing something right. So it's not always go get multiple locations and do all of these things. It might just be looking back at your practice. Am I maximizing it? If I'm not, what do I need to do? And then if I don't want to open multiple locations, look at a piece of land and start investing and then build a giant practice. I mean, there's a million ways to skin a cat, but if somewhere along the way you have to look at yourself and say, all right, the reason I am not successful is because of myself. Like, it's you. It's not anyone else's fault. It's not the economy. It's not team members quitting. It's you. So it's time you have to make the decision and say, I want to be better. I want to grow this business because, like you just said, Eric, if you grow a business in a $2 million practice compared to a $20 million practice, that $20 million practice gets to help a heck of a lot more people in the long run than that $2 million practice. And guess what's going to happen? Someday a person's going to come and offer you a check and you're going to be like, okay, I'm a $2 million practice. My days are numbered. Boom. You'll take the check. You'll work in the practice for 5 years. I was just talking to a doctor that's in New Hampshire the other day. He sold his practice to a corporation, to a DSO, and he just got out of his contract. and he had 5 years. He had to work in the practice until the 5 years was up. And he said it sucked because he saw the practice grow at 20% every single year that he was working there after he sold it. He was like, I just sold this off and I'm sitting in this practice and it's growing 20%.
Watching it.
Like just sitting there watching it. Guess what? You settle a DSO, that's what they're going to do. You want to know how they're going to do it? The very purpose of this conversation. They're going to be doing what you were unwilling to do. They're going to freaking get rid of your operations manager, your office manager, or they'll keep her and they'll put a real COO in place above her. They'll put a real CFO in place. They'll put a real marketing director in place, and they will catapult the business because the best part about dental, and most people don't understand, it's statistics. It's statistics, it's statistics, it's statistics. You have an unlimited number of patients. Unlimited. In any business, that's called a gold mine, meaning any single person, you put out an advertisement, you don't have to niche it down. You say, all right, you need some dental work? Everyone needs dental work. You're in a golden marketplace. Therefore, most corporations know that. And they're like, all right, yep, all I have to do is get patients in the door. I don't have to get very specific on the patients. I just need to get them in the door, get them treatment, get a high acceptance rate. Boom. Numbers, statistics to move the organization forward. And that's what happened to that gentleman. And he just sat there and watched it. And he was just like, okay, I guess you could have done that, but you chose not to. But I think you have to have a purpose for it. You have to understand you started a business for a reason. That was to help a lot of people. So get back to the core way of doing that. Start looking at 12, 24 months saying, who do I need? Can I train this person up? I don't have the ability to train them, but could I send them to a university? Could I send them to this course? Could I do this to upgrade their skill set? You don't always have to go external, but you need to have that conversation. Say, these are the roles and responsibilities. Is this person even capable of doing this? If you think in some way they're capable of doing it, how are they going to get to that point? Because you're not going to be the one that's going to be able to train them. I guarantee you. So you need to go look at outside sources and say, all right, I need to train them up by sending them to this course or doing this 12-month program that they're going to be put in. And then you have to look at the investment on that. Would it make more sense to do this and get this person going? Or would it make more sense to bring someone on that they can shadow and then eventually it's going to keep growing and then they'll get put into a position like that? It's all things to consider. So, I mean, it's this is a great topic for us to talk about. I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, and I think I'll leave you with this: is that you better have someone you can talk to this about. You better have someone you can talk to this about. I mean, I think that this idea. I was talking to someone about this idea recently. Was this idea of lonely at the top, and we were it's kind of an emotional conversation I had with somebody, and we were talking about the idea of like it really is lonely at the top, and the reason why is because people that are at the top. We talk about conversations that most people don't want to talk about. It's like, when we go out, we talk about business all the time. We talk about success. We talk about our issues. We talk about growth. We talk about opportunity. We talk about personal development. We're just not spending all our time talking about the football game. We're not spending all our time talking about the beach. We're not spending all our time talking about your show on Netflix or binging. And so what ends up happening is when you sit down with a bunch of people and you start having critical conversations like this all the time, all those people will fall away. The challenge is you got to find out who will have these conversations with you. And there's only so many people who are just like you, the same ilk, the same wiring, the same, right? That want to focus on, even if they're going to go play golf, they're going to go play golf with somebody who brings value into their life. Well, the same thing in all of this is looking around at your peer group, look at your friends, look at your circle and say, have I cultivated the right type of people? Because when you have to have this conversation, when you have to ask for this type of advice, you better have advisors around you or you better have people around you who can help you. Because if your only advice is to ask this to your golf buddy or to your buddy who wants to talk about the newest Netflix binge or whatever it is, then or the guy who wants to get plastered at Friday night and he's 48-year-old doctor, if that's the only person you have ultimately in your circle to have a conversation with, you better build a better circle, because you better put people that are advisors that can handle this, that are killing it, that have critical conversations, and quit asking the 99% what to do. Go find us 1%ers. Go hang out with the 1% of people like us. Then have that conversation, because you're going to get a different answer. And that answer is going to push you. It's going to challenge you. It's going to hurt. It's going to make you better, though. And you will become a better person because you're being challenged by people like me, and by being challenged by people at Tower, and being challenged by critical friends. Those people are not going to accept ultimately you laying down. They're not going to accept you failing. They're not going to accept you making a mistake. And because they're successful, they're also not going to worry about you surpassing them or beating their practice. They're already successful. So look, leadership, this is all leadership. And I don't know what we're going to title this podcast. I have no idea because, we have a lot of tangents here, Reese. But they're all very, very, very important conversations. And every one of them should be unwound. And you should take this podcast, if you really are a serious student, I don't even want to, we should just take the subscribe thing and flip it over. Cause I don't give a damn if you just subscribe or not. If you don't care, then don't care. I don't give a shit. This is your future. If you're not willing to share this with a friend, if you have no one to share this podcast with, if you have no one you can have a conversation with about this, then ultimately speaking, then you probably haven't built your development enough anyhow, because you should have people that you could take this podcast to and share it with them and have this conversation, have crucial conversations with. Look, if you're not part of this conversation, subscribe or don't subscribe, share or don't share. We've told you to watch a million times, watch or don't watch. It's really up to you, because at the end of the day, I'll tell you, this is a story I'll leave you with. I know I'm on a passionate tangent here, but I remember I was sitting down, and this is a story I'll leave with. How about I'll leave you with one story. My dad was he was gone a lot. My dad was a diesel mechanic. My mom was a nurse, so I didn't come from a silver spoon background. And my dad was a diesel mechanic at Walt Disney World, so he would typically work second shift growing up. And so second shift is, as you can imagine, it's leaving in the afternoon and coming home somewhere at 2:00 in the morning. So I didn't see my dad a lot. He didn't show up to a lot of my sports and those types of things. And so he wasn't an active part of my life in the way I would have liked to have. But I remember sitting down with him, and I shared this with my daughter the other day. I sat down with my dad, and my siblings they struggled in school more than I. And so I kind of got a little fed up with that. Because I wasn't getting attention, Matthew. Imagine, Matt, I needed attention. So I wanted some attention. So for one semester, I got really bad grades. And I wanted attention. I wanted my dad to say, give me the same attention my siblings were getting by underperforming. And my dad sat down with me, and he looked at me, and he gets my report card. He takes a look at it, and he passes it back to me. And I'll never forget this moment. And what he said to me is, "I don't give a damn." Now, that was not what I wanted, Matthew. I wanted him to tell me how much he cared and how upset he was. And I didn't get that reaction. And he said, "Son, I love you. I love you. And at 18 years old, you're going to end up leaving my home. And maybe you become a doctor, or maybe you become a garbage man. I will still love you either way. But what you do with the rest of your life is who you're going to become and what you're going to have to live with and the life you're going to have. If you want to get bad grades, get bad grades. If you want to get straight A's, get straight A's. But do it for you, and do it for the life you want to have and the career that you want to have, not because of me." I never made a B again. And I remember that day being such a critical, pivotal moment in my life, and realizing that everything is ultimately about the decisions I make. It's not about anybody else, but I had to make critical decisions that day. It was a turning point in my life. And it's the same with this podcast, in this moment, in this day, in this time, is you got to ask yourself, everything you decide to do with this information you heard today is a critical turning point for you. You can decide to make a turning point in your life, and a turning point in your career, and a turning point in your future. And you can take this information and you can absolutely run with it and decide. Because here's the thing, I don't know most of you. I never will meet you. We might never come in contact. And it won't matter to me in my life how you end up. Just like my father, it won't matter, ultimately speaking, what you do with your life in the end of the day. If I never meet you, if we never have the fortunate opportunity to cross paths, I might never know you or never meet you. But what you do doesn't really affect me. It won't affect me, just like my dad said it wouldn't affect him. What you do is about you. It's about your future. It's about your life. It's about your opportunity. It's about your kids. It's about your team. It's about your community. And it's about your opportunity. So take the information I'm telling you today and turn the corner. Dig in. Get into your God-given abilities and make a damn difference. Make a difference in your community, in your practice, in your life, your legacy, your future. But the opportunity is up to you.
I like it. Normally I would say like, share, subscribe, but do it if you want to.
Well, I mean, hey, listen, this is your life. It's up to you. Do what you want to. If you want to build something, build it. If you don't, then hey, that's up to you too.
I will say, if you guys aren't following Eric on Instagram, make sure you get your phones out and do so. I think if you haven't noticed lately, he's been posting a lot of great content. It's all just kind of tidbits that you guys need to understand in the marketplace. As Eric and I do, we just kind of go off the hip in these conversations. So he's doing a lot of that during his Instagram posts and those type of things. So if you're looking for more great content like this, make sure you guys go over to his Instagram, like, subscribe, share it with other people to get that nuggets every single day. So thank you as always, Mr. Morin, for joining us. We will see you guys next time. Thank you guys.
See you soon.